All right, I think we're ready to start. Welcome, everyone. Really nice to have so many of you here already. So today is the 6th webinar in our session, and today it will be about the fundamentals of climate adaptation. So today we have 3 parts in the webinar. I will start with a short introduction, and then we have 2 really nice special guests. We will first start with Carl Lenz from Just Dig It, and afterwards Dr. Prince Gokpa from Zimbabwe Farmers Union will talk to us. And I will start with an introduction on action for climate adaptation, so just to set the scene. Then Carl will take us through one of the initiatives they are doing on scaling up regreening to empower farmers to restore their degraded lands. And then Prince will show us a really interesting case study from Zimbabwe on farmer-led scaling up of conservation agriculture. And then we will all round off together. So I hope that after today, we all understand the different types of climate adaptation we can do and how we can actually take action. So today will be a very practical webinar with a lot of case studies. And as you all know, probably this is part of the SAFE4ALL Africa project. And if you want to know more about it, you can save up for the newsletter. But we will also send that in the email. So let's get started. Let's look at action for climate adaptation. So to set the scene first, if we talk about climate change, we can talk about how we can reduce the impact of climate change. And we normally make a distinction between 2 ways that we can reduce this impact. We call it mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation is really about reducing the causes of climate change. So for example, burning less fossil fuels. And adaptation is about when there's climate change to prepare for the impacts. So we're not going to minimize the climate change, but we're going to minimize the impact that we are experiencing. And today we will really focus on this adaptation. So how can we prepare for the impacts? And to think about how we can prepare for those impacts and what actions we can take, it helps to see what kind of different actions there are. This is a very developing field, but today we will make 3 categories of actions. One is disaster readiness, second one is technical adaptation, and the third one is transformative adaptation. And so disaster readiness is really being prepared for a disaster. So we're not going to prevent the disaster from happening, but before, during, and after the disaster, we try to minimize the impact. So for flooding, you can, for example, think about a flood early warning system. Or for heat and drought, you can make sure that there's enough capacity of emergency services, for example, during a very warm day. So that's for disaster readiness. For technical adaptation, we can think about measures to minimize the impact, but they are technical measures. So for example, for flooding, to prevent our houses or fields from flooding, we can build dams. Or to prevent our crops from failing because of drought, we can implement irrigation. So they prevent the impacts for some part, and they are more technical in nature. And then the last category is transformative adaptation, and there we really transform the system, and we often use the qualities of the nature itself. So, for example, to minimize flooding, we can do forest restoration, or to minimize the effects of heat and drought on our crops, we can diversify our crop production and have different crops that can grow under different circumstances. So that's a very general overview of these 3 categories, and I hope it already helps you think about what kind of actions we can take for climate adaptation. But we will dive into those categories more very soon. But before that, we do that, we have the first poll of today. And I would like to know if you have taken action for climate adaptation. So the poll will appear on your screen, and you can say yes or no if you think you have taken action yourself for climate adaptation. All right, what do we have?
We have a couple of yeses from actually many people. Please feel free to write a bit more about the work you've done so that we can also record that. But we do have a lot of yeses in the chat.
Nice, that's exciting. Okay, so we have a lot of people already into the topic, but everyone, like whether you have done anything or not, it's all okay, of course. And we will get back to your answers later. So to place it a bit more in perspective, these different kind of actions, we want to make a whole system of actions. So we want to make sure that all the actions we take work well together. And a framework that we can use for that, it's called the adaptation pyramid. It's a very simple framework, a very simple idea. And the idea is that we have these 3 layers of the different kind of actions, and they all have to be there. So as a basis of our pyramid, we look at transformative adaptation. So it's really about transforming the systems, and we often take the nature as a foundation. So we can also say that we work with Mother Nature and not against her. And so this should be kind of the basis of the system, the climate resilient system we are building. Then on top of that, we can implement technical adaptation actions. So we saw before like the dams or the irrigation, and they are often climate smart technologies. And they basically provide protection when the system below it is not enough. So we build upon the transformative adaptation, we build technical adaptation to together make them prevent impacts. And we really both need them. And the third one is disaster readiness. And so we saw that before. It can be early warning, it can be having your emergency services in place, and it really means that you're prepared for extreme events. So everyone involved, citizens, businesses, governments, institutions, emergency services, they know what to do and they're ready. And as I said, we really need all 3 of them, but we need to make sure they're in balance. And I'm curious to know from you, what you think in your country, which type of adaptation you see most often in practice. And now we have the poll. So you can choose do you think you mostly see transformative adaptation actions, technical adaptation actions, or disaster readiness actions? Perfect. So I think we can end the poll. And that's a really interesting result, actually. So I see most people say technical adaptation is mainly taken, then transformative adaptation, and then disaster readiness. And that's really interesting, also to me, because I think what we often see in practice is that indeed technical adaptation is the main thing that's being done. So we try to use our super smart techniques. They can be very simple or very complicated to prevent the impacts. And you often actually see also quite some disaster readiness. But the key is that we really need these 3 layers to work together. And the basis should be the transformative adaptation. And that often doesn't happen in practice. And so when you don't have this stable base of your pyramid, so to say, the system may collapse. So if we focus too much on technical adaptation or disaster readiness, we don't have a stable system. But if we only do transformative adaptation, we also don't have a stable system. So we need all 3 of them, but in the right kind of balance. So I hope that's clear. If you have any questions about that, put them in the chat. And then to end this introduction, I wanted to, for each type of these adaptations, show you a few more examples. So you have a bit more things to think about. So these transformative adaptation actions, they're really about improving the way and quality of life. They're forward-looking and often more long-term. So you don't always have immediate effects. It really depends on the action, but it can have quite a high implementation cost and a wide stakeholder engagement. So you need a lot of people to work together, but then often your maintenance cost is quite low because you let the nature and the system do its work. So you can, for example, think about forest restoration or soil conservation, but you can also think about actions on your farm, like pits or diversifying your crop production. And actually both Carl and Prince, the next 2 talks, will show really, really nice examples of these kind of transformative actions on farms. And you can also even think more about policy action. So for example, on spatial planning, when cities are expanding, but it's becoming really warm, how can you do something that it's getting less warm in your buildings or you're less sensitive to flooding? So you have different kind of actions you can take on different levels. Then for technical adaptation actions, instead of improving the life, it's about protecting the existing way of life. It's still forward-looking, but it's often a bit more short or medium term. And there's often a large implementation and especially maintenance cost, but again, it depends on what kind of action you take and if it's large scale or small scale. And they're often more technical in nature. So it can be, for example, rainwater harvesting, which can be super simple, low cost on your farm, but also a big system. It can be greenhouses, dams and water storage, or irrigation systems. And then lastly, there are disaster readiness actions, and they're really about restoring the way of life. So we don't prevent the impact, but we restore our way of life. They are more short-term focus. It depends, but often they're more relatively easy to implement and low cost. So an example is early warning systems, which is a really hot topic now, but also very practical machines, like a machine to pump water out during and after a flood event. You see an example here on the picture. And again, here we can also think again more about policy actions. So for example, having a heat plan in place. So it means that you already agree before the disaster who will do what during the disaster. And the same is for making sure that your emergency services are ready to handle the disaster. So that's it. And to bring all these kind of actions together, we were looking for a place that's already done, but we couldn't really find it. So within this project, within the SAFE4ALL Africa project, we're also starting a measured database to try to gather these actions. It's still very much under development, but we will share the link in the chat. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, you can contact us. I just heard something is wrong with the screen, so I hope I will finish this section and then we will fix that. Because the last part is the last poll. And I'm curious to know from you if you understood the concept. So the poll is planning a new area with flood risks in mind is an example of and then you can say if it's a transformative adaptation action, a technical adaptation action, or a disaster readiness action. Okay, I think we can close the poll. And I see that most people said it's a disaster readiness action and then about equal technical adaptation and transformative adaptation action. So that's really interesting that we don't agree. I would personally say it's a transformative adaptation action because you're really looking on the long term and you're already planning ahead and preventing this disaster for having such an impact. So it would be more disaster readiness if you have your area and then you're going to think, okay, if a disaster happens, how are we going to handle it? But if you really already take it into account while you're planning your area, it's more of a transformative adaptation action. So if you have any more questions about that, write it in the chat. And I think it is good to know that many of adaptation actions you can take are not per se transformative or technical or disaster readiness. So it's really this distinction is only a tool to help you think. So yeah, don't worry about it too much. So that's all I wanted to introduce to you.